Well, good morning, members, and welcome to the Isle of Skye and Raasay Area Committee in Highland, Skye and Raasay on Monday, the 22nd of May. We'll start off with apologies for absence, Alistair.
Yeah, but there's no apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest or transparency statements. Have we any? Nope. Okie dokie. Move on to minutes of the last meeting. They're just for noting. And then we'll move on to our first substantive item, which is the housing performance report. And this is for the period 1st of April to the 2022 to the 31st of March 23. And to present the paper, we've got Jennifer Bruce. So over to you, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you very much, Chair. This is our report at present. Most of our work is fairly standard still. We're still kind of working between a hybrid model with some of my team mostly in the office, some kind of half and half. It's varying, and obviously that's between the two offices at the moment. So with respect to repairs, we have had a blip in our emergency repairs, as you can see. Our kind of time frame has gone up from 7.5 in Q3 to 16.2 in Q4, which we admit isn't ideal. However, we had 4 repairs which took over 100 hours to complete, which have adversely affected the performance stats. Generally, we sit kind of round about the Highland average. I think it has been those 4 repairs that have caused the issues. With respect to our non-emergency repairs, as you can see, we've come down slightly within our timeframes, which is keeping us below the Highland average still. We don't include instances where we can't gain access to properties either. Our relet time is higher than we would like, but it has dropped over the last 2 quarters again. We've had a few refusals. We've also had a few impacts on void times due to works or works coming up afterwards that have then needed further addressing, which has caused a little bit of impact on those. Rent arrears continue to rise. We have cost of living issue hitting that as well. My team are continuing to work with tenants to support them, sign point them, put welfare rights in, referring to CAB, etc., where applicable and suitable. We are now, as a council, taking high level as an over 2250 arrears to court through the arrears policy. We do try, before we do any of that, to make engagement, get them to engage with us, get them onto arrears, get the arrears moving in the right direction before looking at any court processes, as always. With respect to homelessness, we have had a blip in a slight downturn after the blip in Q3, although we do still continue to see relatively high levels of homeless presentations, which have been increasing, since the end of Q4 of last year into this year. So basically, it's just to ask the committee to note the report and sort of address any queries that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer, for that. I'm not seeing the other hands, but I'll maybe come in first. So I'm looking at the emergency repairs. We've gone from 7.5 to 16.2, and you articulated that's because of 2 or 3, big repairs that needed done. And then when we look at our relet time, is there a correlation between both of these? Because I am aware that at times there are some properties that have to be relet that can be, in a bit of a state, and they do need quite a lot of remedial action and structural work as well. So just asking, is there a correlation between these 2 figures?
I would need to check that and get back to you, because the repairs section of the report, the stats for that come through that side of the business. So I will check and get back to you if that's okay.
Okay, and my second question before I go to Councillor Stewart, how are we in terms of staff in the maintenance team? Is that looking positive at the moment? And are you finding that there's difficulty getting contractors to carry out repairs? Because I know, even in the house building sector and in the private sector, getting hold of a tradesman can be very, very difficult.
Again, unfortunately, I'll have to check and get back to you on that one. Staff-wise, I believe we are recruiting for a maintenance tech. However, that that sits with Colin and Keith rather than myself, so I'm not completely aware of where that is in the process. And with respect to contractors, we usually do struggle a bit for the reasons that you've said, but again, I would need to double check that. Sorry.
Okay. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Jenny, for getting this sent out to us. I'm just wondering, with regards to the repairs, you know, the report doesn't really mention any sort of tenant feedback, any sort of like tenant satisfaction with the quality of the repairs. You know, how's it sort of done from their point of view? So I'm just wondering, do you have any information on that sort of follow up after the repairs are done? And my other question regarding repairs are, obviously, John picked up on it a little bit to do with the amount of time it took to re-let properties, and sort of the general condition of the properties was cited as a contributing factor for that. I'm just wondering, were these issues that were known to the council, these reported as repairs that needed to happen prior to the tenant exiting the property, or was this something that we discovered when we got the property back to us that needed work done to it? And if I can just move on to the homelessness section, you know, obviously we're aware there's a number of factors that lead to people becoming homelessness, including the sort of breakdown of family. I'm wondering what sort of factors, if that's something that you record, that we're seeing here on Skye, because I know that, you know, as a proportion of our population compared to Highland, you know, we do have quite a concerning number of homeless presentations. I think that's something that, you know, we've really got to understand that the cause of, to see how we can, you know, better support people to sustain tenancies in the long term. And just like as an additional to that, I'd like to know, are we seeing sort of repeat presentations? Are we seeing people coming back through the service who are unable to sustain a tenancy? And if so, what sort of support or who you would sort of refer them to you know, try and get those support networks in place to help them sustain the tenancy? And I think that falls on sort of onto my last point about the rent arrears. You know, I'm a bit concerned that, you know, obviously the threshold for progressing with sort of actions, the in excess of £2,250 is the sort of threshold for that. Now looking at the number of rent arrears, and I think Jake had circulated something, we've got over 130 properties in rent arrears in the ward, and 37 of those properties owe over £1,000. I'm wondering, could you just like let me know the sort of the scope of properties that are above that 2,250 threshold, like how many households does this action apply to? Thank you.
No worries. With respect to tenant satisfaction and feedback, again, I would need to check that with Colin and Keith and the tenancy liaison, because that's their side of the business. And again, similarly, sorry on whether things were reported as repairs before the tenant left. We are generally carrying out pre-void inspections, but we do sometimes get ones where folk leave and they don't tell us they're leaving. So I will check that and come back to you. We do record causes of homelessness. With respect to terms, we're probably on similar pressure to Inverness as a percentage of homeless per population. We don't see a huge amount of people recurring through the system, and generally it's not tenancy sustainment issues that cause their homelessness. For people who are struggling with their tenancies, we are referring to welfare support, CAB. We can put in short-term housing support. We can speak to colleagues in social work if there's a larger concern. So we do work on them. Rent arrears, yes, Jake did circulate that. I appreciate you had asked a follow-up question to Jake's query last week, but between me being on leave and him being on leave, we haven't quite got to that yet. Apologies. The threshold has been set by sort of the Scottish Government eviction ban. So that's where the 2,250 threshold has come from. We do have quite a lot of tenants in arrears. A lot of those arrears, as you say, are kind of nowhere near that balance. With respect to the number that are above that, off the top of my head, I can't recall the actual figure, but it's not a huge amount that are above that 2,250 mark. And we do work with them to get them into arrangements and try and reduce that. But if you are like a £3,000 arrears level, and we are talking to you about that, and you put in an arrangement, it does still take quite a while to come down, so they may still show in the next report as well. But we are, please be assured, we are working with our tenants to try and reduce those arrears.
Thank you. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Jenny. Thank you for speaking to this report. I think Councillor Stewart has touched on the rent arrears. I think, first of all, we should thank all our tenants who are actually managing to meet their rent payments each month in a really difficult environment with all the pressures on people's budgets. So that's the first thing. I just wonder, in terms of evictions in our own ward, is that Jenny, how frequent do we have to resort to eviction? Don't know if you can provide that information. And the other thing, Jenny, is in terms of furniture poverty, which was on the radio last week, and many homes have no floor coverings. And I was just wondering, in terms of our own properties, when we re-let, do we automatically take all the floor coverings from the previous tenant out and just leave an empty home, or how do we provide or deliver the new property for the new tenants? Thanks, Jenny.
With respect to rent arrears and eviction, we very rarely progress to that. Generally, our tenants who are in that situation will work with them to come into arrangements and bring levels down. And even if that is over time, that's still better than going through to an eviction process. So we very infrequently go through the full process. We can get partway through the process and then come back if we get an arrangement, and that's more what tends to happen here. With respect to furniture poverty and floor coverings, our houses are generally completely bare. If the previous tenant has installed full floor coverings and wishes, and they're in good condition, and the incoming tenant wishes to keep them, or the outgoing tenant wants to have a conversation with the incoming tenant about floor coverings, we're absolutely happy for that to happen. But we don't supply carpeted properties, I'm afraid. Our homeless units obviously are furnished, but our mainstream lets are bare.
Okay, Jenny. I'm not seeing any other hands, and I know that you're coming back to individual members with a couple of queries. So members will invite you to consider the information provided on housing performance in the period 1st April 22 to 31st March 23. Are we happy to do that? Okay, and Jenny, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Okay, members, moving on to item 5, a North Skye Health and Social Care Infrastructure Update. And I'm delighted to see this report at committee, because it's been some time since we've had anything at committee roundabout health and social care. And I'm delighted to welcome Fiona Malcolm to committee today. So I'm going to hand over to you, Fiona, and you can talk to the paper. And then after that, I'm going to go to Councillor Munro, who's been heavily involved in this area for some time. So over to you first, Fiona.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. It's really nice to metaphorically be in your meeting, because of course I'm not actually in Skye, as I think the Chair said at the outset. I'm one of the people that's in Inverness. I had hoped that I might be joined by some of my colleagues in other partnership organisations, and in fact I have just messaged Louise Bassell, who some of you will know, who's the Chief Operating Officer, was the Chief Operating Officer for NHS Highland. She's actually now the Director of Nursing, but I'm sure you'll all be really pleased to know that she is keeping this within her portfolio in terms of taking the work forward. So although she's no longer the Chief Operating Officer, which is a post in which she had previously been supporting this work, she is certainly for the meantime continues to be involved, and I have just messaged her. Like I say, I hope she'll be able to join. The other person who I had hoped would be able to join, but he's categorically can't, because he's dealing with a bit of a family emergency, I believe, is Dermot Lawler, who is from Scottish Futures Trust. So I'm afraid you have just got me, but I'm delighted that you've referenced Councillor Munro, who probably knows more about this than I do, because I've come fairly late to the party. But I think it is important that the council are involved in this piece of work. So I have, having discussed it with Councillor Munro probably now quite some time ago, thought this was a good place to start in terms of bringing what is happening to your I guess formal attention, because I'm thinking actually as members, you're probably well aware. I suspect that reading the report, you haven't been hugely surprised by anything you've read, because I know that you've all got an interest in the work that is ongoing. But in any event, I think it is important to bring it formally to the attention of the committee so that you can hopefully note it. It is a report for noting, because and basically, like I've just alluded to, I think it's important in terms of governance that it is formally noted, so that there is a formal awareness of the work going on in terms of the delivery of, and actually I probably should have specified this in the title, it's about the delivery of adult health and social care, because children's social work, as you know, sits entirely within the council, and this report isn't intended, nor does it cover the delivery of children's social work. It's really about the delivery of adult social care, and that in the context of how it works with community health services in terms of the integrated health and social care agenda. And I would say a lot of that work has come about specifically in Skye as a result of the involvement of Sir Lewis Ritchie, who you will all, I mean, again, no doubt will know, prepared a report in 2018. And the broad focus, I'm going to say, and this is where I feel it's a bit teaching to suck eggs, because I know you will have read all this, that I would say his primary objective in 2018 was about emergency and out of hours healthcare. So there's, and I've just welcomed Louise, because you'll see she's suddenly appeared. Louise, sorry, I'm sure you know the members, this is the Skye committee, and I was referencing that you will continue to be involved, notwithstanding the fact that you are now Director of Nursing. So thanks for joining us. I was just making a start and saying from the council view, this is about governance really, so that the council can formally note it. And I was going back to 2018 and referencing Sir Lewis Ritchie's report, which I think is a starting point and is something that any work we do will have to be mindful of. That, I was saying, broadly focuses on out of hours hospital services, although there's a lot more to the report than that. And what that report does include is set out at 5.2, and there's a whole load of bullet points of the recommendations which do form part of Sir Lewis Ritchie's report, which were of course adopted by NHS Highland, their board. And although they're not in any particular order, it's probably of no coincidence that the top one is Portree Hospital Urgent and Emergency Care. And of course, that is not the council business, that is NHS business, where the council has got an important role to play, arises in terms of possibly the second bullet point, community bed provision, because that's about care. And it's important, in my view, that the council is part of the ongoing work which is required to deliver on Sir Lewis Ritchie's report, also to deliver on the strategic plan, which I will come to in a moment, and to basically deliver better outcomes for the people of Skye and Raasay. So members will be aware there's been a lot of community engagement in various forums in terms of the Sir Lewis Ritchie report, and the council, as I said, has only recently become involved in those, as much of that focus has been, I would say, about Portree Hospital. The NHS have set up delivery groups, and the terms of reference of one of those groups is set out in paragraph 5.2, and that's a group that is chaired by the operational area manager that was, as you know, Ross Mackenzie, but I believe that he is been out of office for some time, is due to retire, and I think his portfolio has been taken on by Gavin Sell, but that is very recent, so that is possibly hot off the press and maybe something that you don't know. But Ross won't be chairing that group going forward. That's an important operational delivery group, and I understand going forward it will be led by Gavin Sell, who those of you who haven't met him I'm sure will. So those delivery groups have been set up. Whilst the lead recommendation, like I say, is about urgent care provision, you'll see the second item relates to community beds, which I think has got that interface with integrated health and social care. And there's also a more obvious interface as you look down that list in terms of more general council business, in terms of roads and housing. And for those of you who know me, you'll know roads and housing are not my part of my portfolio, but I do attend those groups with an eye to involving appropriate officers when that might become necessary. I've probably been attending that group for about a year. The other thing I think is worth pointing out is the involvement of the Scottish Futures Trust. Now, saying, Louise, that Dermot unfortunately isn't able to attend. He's been chairing that group. Their role is set out in paragraph 6.2 of the report, and really it's to offer advice to all the agencies that are involved, and again they're listed, in terms of taking forward the recommendations and again improve outcomes for the people of Skye. And I have been attending that Scottish Futures group too. At the time of writing, the terms of reference for that group have not been agreed, and I think that is important, or those terms of reference will be important, because the landscape for delivery of all these, if you like, intersecting pieces of work, we do need to make sure that the right groups are doing the right things that they can deliver upon. So that terms of reference will be quite important. The other thing which I think is quite important, which I think you will all be aware of in terms of, it was before full council a couple of weeks ago, is the strategic plan for the partnership, because any work that is carried out in terms of the delivery of integrated health and social care outcomes for anywhere in Highland will need to be consistent with that strategic plan. Where I think Skye's a little bit ahead of the game is principally because of all this work that's already been happening. So when that strategic plan is signed off, the locality planning work, which in a way is already going ahead by virtue of these groups, will need to be consistent with that strategic plan. I'm in no doubt that they will be. From my knowledge of what has been talked about in terms of outcomes in Skye, it's certain that that is all about empowering communities. It's delivering a local agenda that's right for local places. So in fact, I'm fairly certain that what will be delivered pursuant to the groups that I've referenced will be consistent with the strategic plan. But I think it is important to reference that. Chair, I hope I haven't muddied the waters altogether more about how complicated some of these kind of interfaces are. And I don't know if it'd be helpful for Louise to perhaps say a couple of words, because she has been involved in this for longer than I have. And like I say, I'm really pleased, I'm sure you are too, that she continues to have an involvement in this work.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. Yeah, I mean, I think before Louise came on, you were talking about the lead agency model. So, you know, and the focus on adult health and social care. So before we go to Callum, Louise, is there anything you want to add?
Thanks, yes, and thanks for Fiona and others for being involved. I suppose the challenge is that the Sir Lewis Ritchie report and recommendations were agreed and approved by NHS Highland eons ago before I was involved, and I'm not sure at that point in time where the dialogue was with other agencies that have an interrelationship with the report, so around housing and transport, etc. I know that's latterly coming on board, and we're getting good engagement with the Housing Association and yourselves, etc. I suppose just looking back and reflecting, maybe there was opportunities at that point in time, but obviously the pandemic hit shortly after that, so maybe we lost some ground on that. But I just appreciate the fact that there is much more multi-agency input into the work at the moment, which is really positive.
Thank you for that. Before I go to Callum, I think what's important, you know, to realise is that you know, the communities across Skye are really keen to see implementation of the recommendation from Sir Lewis Ritchie, and I think there's a wee bit of frustration, you know, how slow the pace has been. But very clearly, I mean, it's urgent care at Portree, and I think you know, beds open in both Portree and Broadford, which has a relationship with housing and roads, etc., etc. That's, you know, they're the key issues. But Callum might want to come in and, you know, give his opinion, because Callum's heavily been involved in all of this.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Fiona and Louise. Thank you both. You've, in a way, you've set the context really well for this. I think this is really important. It's important this paper comes to area committee, and I believe it's the first time since Sir Lewis Ritchie's report that any such paper has come to a Highland Council committee. Thousands of hours of people's time in Skye and in North Skye and Raasay in particular have gone into the efforts to maintain primary health and social care services in North Skye. And really, I think by last year we'd reached a point where people were frustrated and exhausted with the effort which was going in, and the pace and direction. And I think in a sense we've maybe got to a better place now with what's set out in the paper here in terms of the Scottish Futures Trust work. And I think just to remember too, 7 or 8 years ago, there were moves to close Portree Hospital, and it was a huge community effort led by SOS, NHS, and the wider community, which saved the hospital, and eventually brought Sir Lewis Ritchie to come and review the situation. So, and I think too, we must remember that Sir Lewis Ritchie's report is not simply an aspiration, but it is a binding document which NHS Highland Board committed to as part of the business case, as part of the full business case to build the new Broadford Hospital. So we are where we are. Sir Lewis Ritchie's report has had some success, particularly in Raasay and Glenelg, but as Fiona referred to 2 particular areas which are still outstanding, and that is the provision of urgent care in Portree Hospital and future community bed provision. And it's really up to the agencies involved and the partnerships under the umbrella of Scottish Futures Trust to take this forward. So, to be honest, it feels like this is a route we should have been on years ago, and it seems we might have gone round a few loops and a few circles to get here. We've had a options appraisal, which a lot of time and effort was invested in, which, looking back, wasn't successful. So now I hope we're on the right route, and that with the partnership which Fiona has referred to, and Louise too, we can make some progress. So, Chair, thank you for the chance to speak to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Yeah, I think there is a huge amount of frustration within the community, certainly, particularly in North Skye, regarding the apparent lack of movement over the last while, as Callum alluded to there. There doesn't seem to be any reason for many people, they don't understand why nothing is happening, why there isn't more being done around the Portree Hospital. And, you know, I think one of the big concerns now, of course, is once when Boomore closed, for example, even despite valiant efforts by the community to try and retain it, it just seems like history repeating itself. You know, Callum mentioned Portree Hospital was under threat itself, but we've had history before of like Edinburgh Gaister Hospital closed despite huge public sort of comments and debates about why should it close. Then Portree under threat, okay, that's been saved, but then Boomore closed. And looking at around the Highlands at the last few weeks in the press, it seems that it would almost appear that we'll never have the likes again in North Skye, where I think it's talking of huge numbers to make such care homes viable, and we never seem to. Well, you know, please tell me that I'm wrong, but it certainly fills me with a bit of dread that we're never going to be in a position that we were before, where we were so ably served by Boomore, by other homes that were set up throughout the island, which have all closed now. And if you look at even in Inverness, where care homes are not financially viable, allegedly, then I think we have real cause for concern here on Skye, and the North Skye in particular, that what is going to happen to our older people. Now, we don't want Portree Hospital to turn into a glorified old people's home, because the services they're providing at the moment, palliative care, etc., is vital to retaining people within their own communities. So, okay, this paper is a start, and I certainly, like with, I think Callum mentioned, the Scottish Futures Trust now sort of advising these various groups that have been set up. I think that is a step forward, because I think we were badly served by the previous setup, where we were being led by the nose to somewhere we didn't want to go, and it turned out that there were concerns from the start. I can't remember who the person was who was leading it now. I think he was based in Dundee, but it appeared quite a few of us were sceptical all the way through, and then it turned out that we were right to be sceptical, because we were being led into a facility at Home Farm, which nobody wanted to end up there. So I think the Scottish Futures Trust will be a good advisory group, and hopefully can bind some of the disparate groups together to find a common goal and a common purpose, and also, of course, to get what the public, certainly in the north of Skye, wish to see. Now, whether that's ever going to be cost effective, who knows? And I just would like perhaps some reassurance, maybe not in today's paper, because obviously it's just for noting, but I think that maybe a future area meeting or a ward business meeting, we could get into a discussion about a way forward that would be advantageous to the general public. Thanks.
Okay, thanks,
Chair, can I-
Drew. I mean, I can see Louise is keen to come in. Fiona, I'm going to go to Louise first. Before I do that, and thanks, Councillor Miller, for your comments, and Councillor Monroe. I suppose what people are looking for is some sort of milestones, and where are we along the road for urgent care at Portree? We know we mentioned community bed provision there, but I think we also know, Louise, the problems that you're having in terms of staffing, even at Broadford and Portree, where we've got beds, but we can't open them because we haven't got the staffing. So maybe something around urgent care and the bed situation, the staffing situation, along with what you're going to say yourself.
Thanks. Yes, and I was going to come in on those anyway. I do want to just reference something Drew mentioned there, which was about the options appraisal. It was me that actually pulled the options appraisal because it wasn't going in the right direction. However, what I want to be 100% clear is that Norman Sutherland, who is the clinical advisor from Dundee, and his team were looking at all options. The option of Home Farm being a 24-hour hub and Portree being a day hub were one of number of options that he'd put on the table as part of their appraisal of what there was. There was also a potential of the other way, almost the other way around with some of the services. So it was one of a lot of options that were never agreed. No option was concluded, but there was a concern that it was even on the table. And I think that was because we'd recently purchased Home Farm. We didn't choose to purchase it, we had to, we were told to. So I think there was a lot within that, but I just want to assure you from a board point of view, we didn't have an option that we preferred within all of that. Norman may have done, he didn't say he had, he just laid them on the table. So I know you're laughing, but that's the way it felt at the time, that we had probably, I think it was about a dozen different options, and there was one that had got a lot of antibodies around it that became the focus of attention, and I think that's why we ended up having to stop the options appraisal when we did. So just to be assured, that was never a board chosen option. We were just along for the ride in the same way that the whole group were around what options we went for. In relation to the urgent care, we did have an urgent care service running from 2020 to May of last year, when we had to suspend it, and it was suspended entirely on staffing challenges, nothing to do with finances, because the money is still there for the service. So we are working, but we've had a number of meetings with the community and with clinicians to look at a sustainable model, because clearly that wasn't one. And time has moved on in terms of what we provide within urgent care across the board, really. So there's been a lot of meetings. There was a recent meeting with Sir Lewis Ritchie attended on the 26th of April that had the GPs involved. It had clinical directors and urgent care staff to try and come up with a sustainable model that's going to work for North Skye. That model is under development and hopefully will be rolling out very shortly. We are continuing to train the advanced practitioners in the meantime, and we have got that service that's running at weekends with SAS covering parts of the week as well. So there's a temporary solution, but we know we need that longer term fix. In relation to bed capacity, you're absolutely right. We have massive challenges with recruiting. Pretty much most of our staff at Home Farm, for example, are agency staff. And that's entirely because we can't recruit. We've repeatedly tried various different methods of recruiting, both to support worker roles and to substantive. We have more luck in the hospital with support workers, but again, challenges with recruitment of registered staff. I'm not as involved now as to what's going to happen with all of that, because that is Pam Cremin's domain in terms of recruitment, but it's just to assure you that we are still actively trying. It's just really, really tricky.
Thanks, Louise. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to pick up on something that Councilwoman Rowe said that was really important. It was about the commitment by the board to these recommendations from the Sir Lewis Ritchie report. And I think this really emphasises the report really emphasised the urgent need for accessible healthcare in Skye, and that's something there's been a lot of hours in the community put into, which it must not go unnoticed. But I think if we go back to the recommendations, it was for the 24/7 urgent care at the Portree Hospital, but more onto the point of the community beds. At that point there were 71 community beds, and there was this commitment and this need to increase it to 77 community beds for Skye. And as members have said, like Councillor Finlayson and Councillor Miller, there is this real frustration in the community because the current situation it falls far short of these recommendations. There's only 41 community beds available at the moment, and as been mentioned before, the urgent care service is only available at weekends and bank holidays. And I think with the provision of the care beds, it leaves our vulnerable and elderly residents without that care sort of accessible to their community. And I think what this does is puts families in a really difficult position, puts families in Skye in a really difficult position. They've either got to provide the support themselves, or they've got to witness their loved ones or family members sent away to distant care homes scattered across the Highlands. And I think it's really crucial that we do provide the necessary resources and staffing and infrastructure, housing, roads. It's all been covered here, to fulfil the promise of quality healthcare services that there has been this commitment to. And I think it is worth as well going and saying that there has been a lot of work put in by the community. The community's engaged with this report, and even before the Lewis Ritchie process in good faith. There's been a lot of hours put in to deliver this outcome. I think it's pertinent that this is taken forward, and it's been mentioned by the members, but that the pace of action does seem to be causing frustration in the community. And I think that's something that really needs action, because there is this almost view that it's being kicked down the line into the long grass, and that's something that we can't allow to continue. So it is a welcome step, and it is good that this has came to a formal committee for noting. That's just my observations on the report, and also on the process of what's happened to date.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Stewart. And I think, as Louise and Fiona pointed out, there are challenges around about staffing, which seem to be really, really central to all of this. And that's why the partnership working that we're trying to move forward is crucial, because no single agency can do this on their own. It's really about us all working together with obviously community input, and the community is frustrated, and their expertise. We need to tap into that resource as well, because the challenges we face, they're not small challenges, they're massive challenges. I'll go to Fiona first before I come to you, Drew. Fiona.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up a couple of points from Councillor Miller's first lot of questions, and also just to cover a little bit of what Councillor Stewart just said. In terms of the care home point you raised, Councillor Miller, you will no doubt have noticed that was all through the strategic plan, and you've rightly picked up that there's a huge challenge in keeping smaller care homes open. I don't want to revisit the Boo Moor decision, but what I would remind members of, and of course you absolutely know this was a privately run care home, and so that meant that the Crossroads had handed in their notice about future service delivery, and there was decisions taken about whether or not it could be sustainably resourced, which would mean, of course, the council or the NHS taking it over, but which, given the amount of work that was required, basically made that fairly difficult to do, because the care inspector would have insisted on fairly large changes because of the fabric of the building. But to offer you some reassurance, that wasn't a decision that was taken by me and Louise. There was a governance process in place in terms of the JMC, which is again this complex landscape we find ourselves in terms of the delivery of health and social care services, because they have a framework that they use to look about how care homes delivery can be sustained going forward. And you're right to identify that it's hugely challenging in smaller care homes, and inevitably smaller care homes tend to be in the more remote and rural parts of Highland. So that is something that is covered in the strategic plan, and I would absolutely encourage you and your communities to feed into that plan whilst that is because that remains an option available to you, because it hasn't been agreed, and that talks about the size of care homes and what communities can expect going forward, because it is very difficult to staff the care homes, but if we're using a private provider, for them to make it pay, because obviously they can give 13 weeks notice at any point, which makes delivery never as nailed on as you might hope and expect it to be. And I guess, Councillor Stewart, a lot of the points you raised, similar to those made by Councillor Miller, it is challenging. Workforce is an absolute massive challenge. In terms of urgent care, Louise will no doubt talk about nursing, or has, but also in terms of social care, there are huge challenges that might lead to people having to go out of area, which is why the strategic plan envisages community supports, being more flexible in terms of SDS, so that families can recruit more locally to try and keep family members in their locality. And I think those are the kind of community supports that we are going to have to look towards going forward. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. And I think, I mean, Health and Social Care Committee last week, we heard about the challenges in terms of the social care staffing. And while it's, you know, it's really, really worrying here in Skye, it's across Highland, unfortunately. Councillor Miller, do you want to come in? I see your hand's gone down.
Yeah, well, I just thought I was getting tired holding it up, so yeah, I don't want to go back over Bumore debacle either. So I'm quite happy with that. But we have concerns, obviously, as you're well aware, I'm sure you're well aware, with the plans for social housing in Perchee, with the plans for a care village idea, though nobody seems to know exactly what that's going to what it's going to be. But one would hope that there will be some sort of modern version of what Bumore was or meant to be, in conjunction with Home Farm. And I don't want to go down the Home Farm debate either, because that is a blot on Skye's history, I'm afraid. HC1, my goodness me. But I think what the community needs is some reassurance, in a sense that people are working on a model that's fit for purpose, that's deliverable, given the fact that we have a huge workforce problem right across the whole spectrum of the workplace. So it's not just NHS, it's not just hospitality, it's right across. And this group here, albeit we're all very professional, we're not going to solve this world problem of lack of workforce, and that is a major worry for people in rural areas. How do we generate our own workforce? And if that's not possible, how do we make it attractive for people to move here? And I know housing is an issue, but housing's been blamed for a lot of things that it isn't, because, you know, Skye, we're building something in the region of, in Perchee alone, of over the next 3 or 4 years, 280 houses, roughly, or 260 houses. So we must be able to work. And I know the Housing Association are working with the Health, NHS at Broadford, for example, to make some accommodation available there. And we've got issues with the Bumore site. We've got issues at the old McKinnon Memorial Hospital site. What's going to be happening with that? So I think there are solutions, but I think we need to try and speed up the process a wee bit to try and reassure people who are of a certain age that their future isn't going to be sent somewhere, because we can see across the Highlands in the last few weeks, up north, wherever, in Inverness itself, I mentioned that earlier, where places are closing. So the choice of going somewhere are becoming fewer and fewer. So my concern is about Perchee and the potential, working with the planning permissions that are in progress, and working with yourselves, social care, NHS, to see what we can come up with a workable solution. But we can't blame the government for everything, because the workforce is one of the key problems, and generating a workforce is, I don't know who's going to come up with a solution for that, but I'm hoping that eventually we'll get some reassurance. I think that's me. Sorry for rambling on a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. Yeah, and I think the point that you're making about about what the workforce is, it is central to many of the issues that we're facing. And again, we possibly need to be doing more to make health and social care a more attractive career for people. And I think education clearly's got a role to play there. But as you say, it's not something we're going to solve overnight, and that's why it is important that all groups, all agencies, and all communities work together, and we try and find solutions jointly. Okay, right, Fiona, I'm going to give you the last word, or Louise, either if you want, is anything you want to say in summary to finish off this, because this report is for noting.
I'll just say a couple of things and I'll pass to Louise. I totally agree. I hope that the work of the Scottish Futures Trust will look at some of the bigger issues you're talking about in terms of how the infrastructure items, care villages, housing. Housing, I think, is key in two respects. Number one, for key workers, for staff, because that's an issue for workforce have to live somewhere if they're coming to the island. Secondly, for actually people who've got a support need, because people who've got a support need, they need appropriate housing, and we also need to look at, and we are, the idea of cluster housing, because to make those easier to support people, it's not rocket science to say it's easier if they live near each other, because there's then less effort, people having to travel around. So we are looking within that housing work that's going on in Skye to make sure there are appropriate clusters so that we can support people in appropriate housing without the need to leave the area, for example, to get a care home bed or some other provision that would be out with Skye. So that is all part of the strategic plan going forward. Just to pick up on Councillor Finlayson's point too, yes, there is ongoing work, which if any of you have been at the Health and Social Care Committee would have heard this, about making it an attractive profession so that people want to go into social care and see it as a career. There's work going on with the UHI about apprenticeships for that kind of career. So, but I can't pretend that doesn't mean staff are going to be available tomorrow. They're not. So it's basically managing the short term whilst also being mindful of the long term, and that long term, medium term stuff will be some of the stuff we will be doing with the Scottish Futures Trust. So I hope that's helpful. My own final word is, you know where I am if you have got any queries, and I'll pass over to Louise, and thanks Louise for attending today.
Thanks, and very much appreciate the interest in the discussion, because as has been said by a number of people, we are all in this together. It is a challenge in different directions for all of us, but plenty of opportunities too. And I think one opportunity that I just want to focus on, and it's been mentioned a lot here, the challenge around home farm is actually getting a different view of home farm within Skye, because it is the only care home at the moment that we've got in the north. We need to be getting a better view of it. It's changed significantly, but gladly, since we took over it, and we really need to get it to a place where people actually want to work there and are comfortable with their families being there. So anything we can do as a collective to change that sort of perspective on home farm would be welcome. So.
Okay, thank you both. I think in having this report come to committee, I think it's been useful, and I think it's highlighted a lot of the issues that we all knew about, but I think it's also making it clear to members of the community and the public that there is a will for all agencies to work together. This is not going to go away, and we're not going to get solutions overnight, but we need to see some progress. I suppose it's about milestones. We're on a journey. If we could just see progress in the journey, and categorically there are certain areas that are of key priority. And again, it's like urgent care, and it's obviously beds, and it's staffing. So can I thank Louise and Fiona very much for attending, and members were asked to note, which we've done, and I think we've also contributed widely to the debate. Thank you. Okay, members, moving on to item 6, Highland Quiet Routes. There's a pilot project taking place, and we've got two, and we've got Alan Bryce with us. So Alan, do you want to give us a brief introduction to the paper, and then we'll see if members have got any comments to make.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Good morning, members. I'll just share my screen with you. I don't know if my presentation has come through to you. It should have come through now.
Yeah.
Okay, members, the report in front of you presents 2 Highland quiet routes.
Just to say, Alan, we're not seeing your presentation.
You're not seeing it.
Yeah, I've got it now.
Okay. Okay. So the report in front of you, members, presents 2 Highland quiet route pilot projects, the Armadale to Tormore quiet route and the Raasay to Inverarish quiet route. The aim of quiet route pilot project is to encourage active travel for everyday journeys. This aligns with the National Transport Strategy's sustainable travel hierarchy that prioritises walking, wheeling and cycling. Legally, there will be a requirement to temporarily reduce the speed limit on both proposed quiet routes between settlements from 60 mph to 40 mph that will require a temporary traffic regulation order through the Highland Council Legal Services. National speed limit setting policy allows for 40 mph speed limits on roads forming part of a route for vulnerable road users. The budget for quiet routes is provided in full by Transport Scotland through Hightrans. The proposed Armadale to Tormore quiet route is on the A851 single track road that links services between Armadale and Tormore Community Forest, passing through settlements at Vassar and Calgary as shown on the screen. The route has been assessed by consultant engineers and road safety audit. Speed data within Appendix 1 to the report confirms sufficiently low speeds that associated with the proposed design within Appendix 3 to the report to reduce the national speed limit from 60 mph to 40 mph on these sections of road. Speeds through Advassar and Calgary will remain unchanged at 30 mph. If you have a quick look on your screen, excuse me, you'll see the red section is the 30 mph section and the 2 blue sections on either side where the 60 mph limit would be reduced to 40. Okay, moving on to the Raasay project, Raasay Inverarish quiet routes proposed from the Inverarish to the Raasay ferry terminal and up towards the Pictish Stone as highlighted on the presentation. The route has been assessed by a consultant engineer also and road safety audit. Speed data within Appendix 2 to the report confirms sufficiently low speeds associated with the design in Appendix 4 to reduce the speed limit on the national speed limit sections of the route to 40 mph. That section that will be reduced to 40 mph is shown on the slide is the red section of road. 30 mph speed limits between Raasay Primary School and Inverarish would be unchanged. So what are some of the general benefits of quiet routes? They encourage wider use of existing rural road network for active travel through minimally invasive and cost-effective traffic calming measures such as lines, signs, thermoplastic road markings. They raise driver awareness of shared space through repeater signs and speed roundels across the project routes. They reduce the speed limit on national speed limit sections of the road to 40 mph, and they make active travel more accessible to local residents. Subject to the recommendations within the paper being approved today, both projects are proposed to go live on the 1st of July and operate for 18 months. Data will then be collected during the consultation period, during a consultation period of the project to inform whether the quiet routes are suitable to become permanent fixtures. Where they are considered to be permanent, then we would bring a further paper to committee in 18 months' time. Thank you very much, members. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Alan. We actually did discuss this previously, and I'm not seeing any members' hands up. So, members were asked to approve the Armadale to Tormore quiet route and the Raasay and Inverarish quiet route. including temporary traffic regulation orders, reducing the speed limit on 6 to 60 in sections of both routes from 60 to 40 for a period of 18 months. Members, are we happy to approve?
Yeah, approve.
Okay, Alan, thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you, members. Goodbye.
Okay, members, we're moving on to item 7. It's the local allocation of parking income, and Fiona Cameron's with us to give us a brief introduction to the paper and give us an update on some of the applications we've had in. So over to you, Fiona.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, members. So you'll be aware that this paper is requesting from 2 different sources the total of £125,000 to be allocated from the parking income to go towards making improvements to the road infrastructure systems in Skye and in Raasay. So members will also be aware, unfortunately, that we had disappointing news last week from the Scottish Government that they have not approved an award of funding to match fund this. But nonetheless, as per the recommendations in front of committee today, we are still asking that 125,000 be ring-fenced to deliver some of the road schemes that are outlined in this report. And as per the second recommendation, just asking members to note that that would be done by going back to consult with the roads manager on which schemes can be delivered for the funds that are going to be available. So it's a very brief introduction, Chair, but I'm happy to answer any questions or give any further information.
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, it's very disappointing that we weren't successful in our application to the Islands Infrastructure Fund. My understanding is that it was a very strong application and there was a lot of officer time went into preparing the application. We were also, I think, told by Scottish Government that roads were included. And I think the schemes that we had indicated are schemes that support both tourism, but more importantly, they're lifeline roads for communities here on Skye. So it was very, very disappointing that we didn't get that match funding. So I personally am very keen to see that we continue with the investment that we've offered, because we need to see this as a priority, because our communities see roads as a priority, and we need to continue to invest. So I'm going to hand over to see if members got any comments. Councillor Stewart.
No, thank you, Chair. And I think I just echo the points by Councillor Finlayson. It is a very disappointing result from the fund. But it is worth commending the officers for the time and effort put into preparing the application and bid to this. But I think it just goes to highlight the disconnect. It is a real priority for the people of Skye and Raasay. So the roads, the infrastructure that connects our islands. And I think it just highlights the disconnect from the Scottish Government to our more peripheral and rural communities. And I think if anyone from the Scottish Government did come to Skye, they would fully understand that the need for this investment and why that this application was so vital in delivering this infrastructure for the people of our island. But no, that's my comments on it. But I would just like to put on record my thanks for preparing this bid and supporting it as much as possible.
Okay, I'd be very surprised if Councillor Miller doesn't come back with a response, Councillor Stewart. But I do think it's important to also reiterate that we have been successful in previous funding applications in terms of Highland Infrastructure Fund, even though this is a disappointing decision. Councillor Miller.
Well, there we are now. Interesting. Yeah, obviously disappointing that we weren't successful this time around, but I think that I'm not going to play the blame game and play Mr. Councillor Stewart's game, but it's very disappointing that we weren't fortunate this time. I think we have to regroup for next time, because we also, of course, were unfortunate that we didn't get the fund for the Portree Harbour either, which we can blame other people for that perhaps, but I think that we have to just be sensible and regroup and look at how we can adapt or add some value for money onto the previous applications for next time round and see if we can get more. But just concentrating on this report for the moment, I think that perhaps we should look at maybe because it says in this report the various schemes and the, for example, the EV chargers at the Old Man of Store. I think we should maybe move that to another day and concentrate on this money being put forward solely for Tarmacadam, for our roads. I think that I think more and more people are making use of EV chargers. We have to really make sure that when they're installed, they're being maintained properly. And I would rather see that line on page 3 of the report with EV charger, the Old Man of Store, maybe move to another application for funding, perhaps, and concentrate this funding on our roads, because I think, as I say, we don't have the matching funding, but we have money that was agreed by the administration with the council, contrary to the opposition, for extra funding for roads, and I think we've got that money, the £125,000. I think we should get that onto the roads network as soon as possible, and look at the other parts, the chargers again, maybe at one of our ward business meetings. Thank you.
Yeah, so that would be, we've got the 240 that was agreed economy and infrastructure, and if we agree this, we've got the 125 from our own share. So that does at least give us something to be working on. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to echo your own comments at the beginning, and I won't be making any political judgments on this, but I think it is disappointing, seeing that we have done fairly well in previous years. It's just when you get feedback which seems to contradict the ethos of application, it's really hard when we think of the effort which has gone in. And you've said it, and Councillor Stewart said it too, you know, every route in Skye is a tourist route, but also lifeline routes for the people who live here, and that wasn't recognised in the feedback we got. So I think we have to, as Councillor Miller says, just regroup and look how we go forward. And in the funding climate we're in, we really need these awards to come to help us develop our infrastructure. So it is disappointing, but we just have to pull our brakes up and go for the next one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's some interesting comments all round, but I think what we had in agreement is that we were the 81,000 made up 225k. We're in agreement of that, so we agreed to homologate the local allocation, despite the fact that we didn't get the island's infrastructure match funding. Are we happy, members? Okay, thank you.
Happy.
And thank you as always, Fiona, for your input. Okay, members, we're moving on to the parking tariffs, and we've got Shane Manning, who's looking as very smart as always, Shane. So Shane's going to give us a brief outline of his report, but we are homologating because we did support this at an area business meeting on the 13th of March. Over to you, Shane.
Good morning, members. Hope you're all well today. Yeah, the paper before you, just as John has stated, homologates some discussions we previously had at ward level, and also decisions that were made as part of the budget process back in March at full council. So we also have the addition of Kilt Rock, specifically mentioned here. So it's nearing completion, and the introduction of mandatory pay and display parking at this site with a restriction on overnight stays for motorhomes is included. And just note that in addition, the outcomes of last year's revenue from car parking is detailed as 92,262 to be allocated to the Skye and Raasay committee fund. Any questions, members?
Okay, thank you, Shane. I think it's important to say that, you know, the parking charges are also introduced to help with the management of traffic at these very busy sites. I'm just double checking that that's the 22-23, but we should be hearing about our 23-24. Sorry. Oh, that is 22-23. My apologies. I thought it might have been a wee bit more, Shane, but not to worry. Anyway, we'll go to Drew.
Thanks very much. Yeah, and yeah, I suppose we are homologating this, but I just wondered. Obviously, we could do with more money from our share of the parking, and it's a shame that we're not getting any money, for example, from the car parking in Summerless Square, which would be very welcome if we could get some of that. But also, I think what I really want the question, Shane, would be, and I don't mind. I agree with the 4.3. I'm quite happy with that. But how are we going to enforce the no motorhomes overnight parking? Because I think it's all very well putting the signs up, but as I'm sure you're well aware, and I'm sure the 3 other members for Ward 10 are well aware, that people mostly just ignore the signs and park because they know they're not going to be enforced. So given the money that we're taking in, and given that you've got, I think, I don't know how many staff you've got in Skye now, will there be a possibility of some of the staff maybe touring about at night time, checking that there isn't any overnight stays, just even random ones, so that people will get the warning and get a fine if they're there sleeping in their beds at 10 o'clock at night, where they shouldn't be parked there?
Okay, thanks, Drew. I mean, I think that's a theme that we've discussed with Shane previously, given that when we do get on-street revenue as well, Shane. And I think what we're suggesting maybe is, could we have more parking enforcement officers, and is there flexibility in their working hours, as opposed to what Councillor Miller's asking?
Yes and yes. So there is flexibility in their working hours, and so we certainly from May onwards we start looking at evening patrols. The staff are paid for this in overtime, due to the requirement really to keep them on Skye during the day, where the main bulk of the pressures are, and that overtime is funded from things like on-street pay and display income. So it's just a management exercise for me, managing the budget and allocating overtime to do these evening patrols. It's done everywhere across Highland, so we have random evening patrols in Inverness, Sutherland, Caithness, etc., Fort William. And I'm all too aware, as Councillor Miller highlights, that this is just a sign, but at the end of the day, without that sign there, when we do discover contraventions, we can't do anything about it. So the first thing is to get the sign and the traffic order in place, and then we can actually, on the random occasions that we will turn up, we tend to go along at sort of 8, 9 o'clock at night, and any vehicles that we see at that point, we'll advise the drivers. We'll give them a tap on the window, we'll knock on the door, and we'll say, you do realise that if you're here beyond 10 o'clock, then you'll be subject to a penalty charge notice. And again, if we then turn up between 10 o'clock and 8 o'clock in the morning, then we will issue them a penalty charge. So there's some additional signing that we're going to be putting in. So we have a symbol. So we have a rack of symbols with a red cross or a green tick on them. So we have a picture of a motorhome, and it's got a big red cross between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. It says below the vehicle. So we'll be putting them in as well, to just very clear at the entrance point that that you should be under no illusion that you're not meant to be here. But we're all too aware that some people just will do what they will do, and if we catch them, they will suffer the consequences, unfortunately.
Okay,
No,
you,
fortunately
Shane.
is the word. Unfortunately.
Henderson, he just come through on social media. Highland Council recruiting for 3 people to join a friendly and diverse team, council-wide parking enforcement officer. So I don't know if you said there'd be someone coming to Skye or not, Shane, and maybe you could confirm for Councillor Miller why we don't get any of the income raised in Summerled Square because of the timing of the policy.
Yes, so 2 things there. We are recruiting currently for 3 officers, basically to bolster the support to outlying areas, because we do service a lot of outlying areas from Inverness. So officers will attend in Caithness and Sutherland and Skye and Kyle, and that area, and they're supported from Inverness. And we have quite a large pressure point in Badenoch and Strathspey, which currently isn't manned locally. So we're casting the net to see who would like to come and join the ever-growing team. And I do have I've mentioned it before, members, you know, I do have a plan I'm working towards to have 3 enforcement officers covering Skye sooner rather than later. And I'm looking to base one on the south of the island or around the Kyle of Lochalsh area. So I am working towards that, members. I can't give you a definitive date, but I continue to make the appropriate noises to try and get that 3rd member of staff located in the area. Yes, so the issue around Summerlin Square and the Green, as are all the car parks in Inverness and all the car parks in Fort William, they're car parks that predate the policy change. So the cutoff date was set as November 2019, I believe, which any car parks that were charging before that make up part of the service budget. So, you know, the council relies on that income as part of its service budget and wider financial commitments and budgetary process. And to take that money out of that process would be a very difficult thing to achieve as established income streams, and that was debated at length at full council. Now, obviously, members are always at liberty to discuss that again in the future if they so fit. But that's policy, and that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you. I remember that debate at council very well, Shane. Councillor Monroe.
Thank you, Chair. That's funny. I've never heard that council meeting discussed before. I think we've had a few goes at that. First of all, I think £92,000 is a significant amount of money coming to the ward, and the thing is, we can choose how to spend it locally. Money from previous 2 years has gone into our roads, as we heard in the previous item, which is really important. Shane, it's good to hear about the enforcement at Kiltrock, and I approve the charges and the way we're going to deal with them with the camper vans and such like. And I think it's important we don't have Highland Council car parks seen as just a place to camp down overnight. But I think we've just got to be aware too, the challenges in this. It's mid-May now, and we've had a huge amount of camper vans in the island since Easter, and probably in greater numbers than ever before. And if we move them on, we're just displacing that van to a lay-by or to somebody else's drive. It's a real challenge, and I don't know where we go as a tourist destination in this. I'm sure all the camping sites will be full up between Sliggachan and Uig and Staffin and Portree and Edinbane and Dunvegan and whatever. I think it's just a challenge where people are seeing Skye as the ideal place to take their camper van, and that presents us with a great challenge, maybe a chance for some income too from legitimate parking from penalties. But I wouldn't like to think that we'd get a reputation for a place which is just piling fines on visitors just willy-nilly. But it is a challenge. Thanks, Shane.
Okay, thanks, Callum. I think it is important to state, Callum, that there are a number of campsites that provide these facilities, and we have had feedback from them that maybe they're not being fully utilised because people are taking advantage of parking in parking bays where there's not a restriction. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. But I think we've got to be seen to be fair, and I think we've got to be seen to be supporting our businesses as well, particularly our campsites who do offer facilities. Councillor Millard?
Yeah, thanks for letting me back in again. Yeah, I was obviously on enforced leave when that debate was taking place in headquarters, Shane. So I missed that debate, but I would certainly be arguing if there's an opportunity again that we should get something from there, because to be fair, we're subsidising your service by allowing other areas not to have parking charges. And as part of at that time, the Shopkeepers Association in Portree and being a local member, I was very keen to have parking charges introduced in the Green and in Summerlin Square to allow people, traffic to be circulating so that people could use the shops. That's when there were shops other than tourist shops in Portree. So I think that we're being penalised now for being forward thinking in a sense, because we're not getting a contribution from those parking charges, because we were one of the first places probably to have a village centre parking charges. But, you know, I think that we need to be maybe putting a message out on social media, because I understand there are certain social media sites which are telling people with camper vans where to go for the night, that they won't be disturbed. So maybe we should be tapping into these social media sites and saying parking is forbidden overnight on council car parking, etc., etc. And therefore, perhaps we need some more signage in places like Portree and in Broadford, Killacan, where we have car parking, council car parks, just to say to people, you cannot park here, or you will be charged a fee for doing that. In other words, you'll get fined. So I think we should be making maybe better use of our camper vans, unless somebody comes up with an idea of how do we get an income from all camper vans coming onto the island. But that's somewhere in the future. So I think, you know, I'm happy to, as I said before, to endorse this, but I really think we need to be looking at some way of supporting the local businesses, and because there is a genuine concern out there, environmental concern as well. If these camper vans are parking in unofficial sites, and as Councillor Rowe said, laybys, etc., what are they doing with their waste? So we also maybe need to be advertising the fact that there are facilities available on Skye and where they are for people, to encourage them to dispose of their waste sensibly in these places as well. I know it's nothing of this report, and but I think it's something we need to look at the overall thing. As Callum has said there, we don't want to be chasing people away, but therefore, and by fining them, but then we have to make it clear that we're expecting them to behave in a proper manner when they are on Skye with their camper vans. So we may be somebody, a genius or a young person, who can work these social media sites, work them to our advantage, rather than we're being sort of almost we're almost being held to ransom in some ways by people who are saying, oh, you can go there, you won't get any fines, there's no traffic wardens on the go, don't worry, you can park there. Yeah, okay, that's enough.
Okay, I think as soon as you mentioned the young people, Councillor Stewart put his hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say, you know, a lot of what Councillor Miller was saying, there's actually very true. You know, there is this almost wider issue out with of you know, the parking revenue and the parking designations about tourism as a whole. And I think, you know, keeping to the topic of the parking income, you know, it's definitely, it's good to see the work with the Kiltrock car park. But Chair, it perhaps might be something to bring forward to a subsequent committee, is this wider issue of sustainable tourism. And I think that's something that, you know, Councillor Miller was saying, you know, is a big issue, not only as a, you know, the challenges that Councillor Miller was talking about, but also the opportunity that it brings for our community and for the local authority. So I think that might be something, Chair, that could be brought to a ward business meeting or to an area committee at some point. But no, that's my comment. But thank you, Shane, for presenting this, and for your continued work and the work of your team with parking enforcement. I'm not entirely sure where Councillor Miller's been looking, but I've seen your team out on a number of occasions, and it's very good to see. You always when you see the traffic enforcement team, you always see someone firing some coins in the meter.
Right, Shane, you've you probably didn't think you were opening this can of worms when you brought this report, but this is definitely the last word, and it's going to yourself.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm all too familiar of the concerns that members are rightly expressing around tourism, and I've been very active we previously did have a tourism committee, and during the COVID recovery, obviously we were very active around all the tourist destinations and looking at ways we can mitigate some of the staycation problems that arise around the network. So members, you're spot on, and I'm very, very familiar with the issues that you describe. I mean, for members probably may or may not know that we have 12 trial sites where we have what's called short stopover for motorhomes. So we have 12 council car parks where we charge £10 for the vehicle to stay overnight, and they're allowed to stay for 24 hours in any 72-hour period. So this was to deal specifically with the fact that people couldn't get into many of the motorhome sites. During the COVID recovery, obviously there was even more pressure on some of these sites that were on 50% capacity, etc. So we've decided to extend that to this year as well, so those trials are still running, and we'll try and monitor how they're performing. They are generating revenue. Some are much busier than others. And we don't provide any facilities at these sites. This is just, all we are doing is making it legal for a motorhome to stay in a council car park overnight, and we define that overnight as 10 o'clock till 8 a.m. We normally, it's policy that we don't allow caravans / motorhomes to stay overnight in council car parks. So we've actually lifted that restriction at 12 sites around Highland. Now, I'm not saying that's appropriate for Skye, but I think I'm highlighting that we are looking at a pragmatic approach, and we're looking where we can change things around to deal with local circumstances. We certainly will do so, and will continue to do so, especially if members come up with localized solutions. And on the social media issue, yes, we are very familiar with some of these sites that information is passed around very quickly between these group members, and they get to know it. But it works in our advantage as well when we're able to focus enforcement, because they get to know very quickly, don't go there, because parking enforcement are on the case. So we work with our comms team and our other stakeholders, and we certainly do make an effort, but I'm sure we could do more to engage with some of these traveling websites for staycations, where we could highlight the risks those drive. There was only one third thing which I would mention is the environmental impact from blue and black waste. So, I mean, we are all too familiar also with the bad side of motorhoming. Now, these are contained units, so they do have chemical toilets. They should be quite adequate to stay in car parks without having to discharge any material. They just need to plan their journey, go to sites where they can safely dispose of their materials. But I take the approach that we should be coming up with policies and strategies for decent people who are using, are visiting us. The vast majority of people are visiting the Highlands and very respectful and use all the services that are provided around the network. And then we deal with the people who are abusing our environment. We deal with them through enforcement. We just try not to, I certainly try not to tar everybody with the same brush. And we're trying to come up with strategies that are pragmatic and help people visit the Highlands. But bear in mind that we will deal with people when we can who misuse the environment.
Okay, I think that's a fine set of statements to leave us with, Shane. You've becoming a bit of a philosopher there as well, but I think everything you've said there is justified, and I think it's appreciated. So, members, are we happy to approve the introduction and enforcement of mandatory parking charge at the Kilt Rock, and approve the homologation of changes in parking fees and changes as supported by Isle of Skye Raasay members at a business meeting in March? Yeah. Okay, Shane, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, members.
Okay, members. Okay, we're moving on to item 9, the implementation of Highland's annual report. And we've got Angus is with us. Angus, are you there?
Yeah, good morning. Yes, good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. How are you today? Just to let you know, for those that don't know me, my name is Angus MacLeod. I'm the Policy Officer at Highland Council. I'm the guy that fills up your mailboxes every Friday with political parliamentary briefs, so you've got me to blame for that. I've spoken to the committee previously on Brexit, and despite or because of that, you've invited me back, so thank you for that. But I'm here to speak about the implementation of the Islands Act 2018. It's just a paper for noting. It's hopefully a reasonably good news story, although I know some of the stuff's been covered earlier in this meeting. What I've tried to do is summarise what the plan is by providing some background to it and some links. I appreciate that some will be more familiar, some less familiar with what the Islands Act actually is, but the links are there for those that want to delve into it deeper. And I've also as well summarised some of the groups involved. It's not just a case of the Scottish Government and the relevant council that's involved. There's a number of other groups involved as well that are involved in the implementation of the Act. So moving on to this, I suppose the important stuff, this relates to the funding streams. Now, the report itself covers what the Islands Act has done for Highland Council within the last financial year. So that's financial year 22-23. So you'll see from the funding streams, it's quite a busy space, as most funding streams are, but I'll pick out those that relate specifically to Skye and Raasay. So it's 6.2. I've heard the Old Man of Storby mentioned on a couple of occasions. I've been listening in the meeting. So they got £440,000 as part of the Islands Infrastructure Fund. That was it. And it's 6.3. £40,000 went to the Angus Og Archive, which is based in Skye, and I've seen quite a lot of involvement in that. That was quite a good one because I felt it was quite a good matchmaking service that we were able to do there and marry that up with Highlife Highland. It's 6.4. The cost of crisis. This is the cost of crisis emergency fund was allocated. It was actually mentioned in the Scottish Government's emergency budget review on the 2nd of November last year. And what happened with that was that Glendale Community Hall got just over £10,000, and for Skye and Raasay, the cost of living payment for eligible households was given at £155, and that covered 694 households. So that was in relation to some of the funding. I want to talk about some of the island work streams that are ongoing or have ceased, or just to give you an update on what's happened in the last financial year. You may recall there was a lot of discussion about an islands bond. This is a suggestion that 50k of funding was going to go to support residents to either remain or to encourage individuals to move to the islands. Now, they did quite a lot of consultation on that. This is the Scottish Government, and they decided not to go ahead. The decision for and against was pretty even, 50-50, but the majority of those in the islands didn't support it. So they put more weight towards what those in the islands felt they didn't support it, so they chose then not to go ahead with that. So what they've said is that some of the learnings and some of the outcomes from that they'll put towards a depopulation action plan, which I'll just touch on later. The next thing I'm going to talk about is sort of the carbon neutral islands. Now, in relation to yourselves, Raasay has been identified as one of the 6 islands that they're looking to go carbon neutral. I've put in a wee link there into the project report, which was published in January 2023. So those, again, who are interested can get more detail in relation to that. They can have a look at that. And I've also just, again, for information, I've put in a link to the Scottish Passport Project. So effectively all islands, I think 66 in total, have all given a sort of a digital stamp. So if you visit those islands, you'll get a digital stamp, or you can even get a hard copy. There's certain locations you can go to. It's an app that you can download in it. I've done it myself. In fact, I just got up to, I think, up to 30 islands myself. So I've done it myself, and it's just one of those things that you can do for fun, and it hopefully will encourage individuals to visit the islands a bit more. And then I mentioned depopulation earlier, so we're expecting the Scottish Government to come up with a draft plan late this year, in 2023. And it's a plan around depopulation. As already mentioned, some of the findings from the Islands Bond will feed into this as well. And Just to sort of let you know in general terms, it's not specifically Islands related, but I mentioned at 7.8, £20,000 was allocated to Highland Council. And this is looking at childcare, because depopulation obviously is just not a single item. It's housing, it's infrastructure. But one of the issues that came up was childcare. There's a big issue with childcare in some of the more rural and island areas. So there was a test project going to be run up in the Kinloch-Burvey area to see how that would do. And if that's successful, again, that could hopefully then feed into the islands. And the last thing I was going to mention was, and I heard Fiona talking about just as I dialed in, was about the future funds. Now that's no longer future funds because the decision has been made. That was the Islands Infrastructure Fund for this year coming. Unfortunately, Skye was unsuccessful, but I heard Fiona taking all the flack for that, so that's brilliant. I don't need to take the flack for that. And the money was going to go to Carna instead. Just so you know, the Highland Council didn't receive the least amount of money. Actually, Orkney got less money than Highland Council. It was a competitive process. The area that was most successful and achieved most of the funding was Argyll and Bute. They only applied for one. And they got it. So it was Argyll and Bute. Incidentally, the Western Isles applied for 4 and they got money for 4. And they got 765,000. So there's no kind of exact science there as to do with population. It was a competitive fund process. There is a discussion that ongoing funding is going to be done on a pro rata basis and a population basis. That would mean Highland Council will get just short of 10% in relation to that if they do it. They've done funding before on that, but the current model is a competitive process. So I'm going to wrap it up there. As I said, it's for information, but happy to answer any questions if I can. If you want to do that. Okay, folks, thank you.
Thanks, Angus. I'm going to just come in with a couple of queries there, a couple of questions. The islands groups, and I'm very conscious that Skye is the second biggest island in Scotland. And at times, some of our island authorities don't seem to take recognition of this, and they seem to try and hoover up all the funds. And I know the people in Orkney and the Western Isles have criticised me before for saying that, but for me, that's the reality. In terms of the National Islands Plan Delivery Group and the Island Strategic Group and the Young Islanders Network, have we got people from Highland Council on these groups, or are they dominated again by the island authorities?
The answer, short answer is yes. I sit in the delivery group and the Island Strategic Group. The chief executive and the leader go to that. And in addition to that, they're trying to introduce an islands transport forum that's going to be linked into that. And I would expect Tracy Arry, who's already been in communication, will deal with that as well. So I sit in the senior officer group in relation to that, and our chief executive and our leader sit on that. And in relation to the young Islanders, I believe so. There's a link. I think I provided a link. If I just go back up the report, I think if you go in there, the last time I looked at it, there is a link and it tells you who's in that, the Young Islanders group. So let me just check and see. So yeah, if I didn't provide a link, if you key that into the Google, it will come up with.
There is a link, Angus, and okay, so you need to be speaking more to us here in Skye, and we need to be speaking more to you, and you need to be making sure that you're representing us. Good. Okay, Councillor Stewart.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Angus. It's a very comprehensive report and a lot of good resources linked to that. So thank you. There's been a lot of good work put into this. One of the points I'd like to pick up on was on the population, and it was really good to hear what you were saying about the trial up in Kinloch-Burvey, because a real concern that I've got is, while Skye as an island may not be depopulating, with the numbers the way they are, it's the dependency ratio of economically active people to those who are not. We're really seeing that demographically, and that's coming to me as a big concern. So I'd be interested to hear what sort of things are in the pipeline, or what else can be done through this, sort of facilitate the retention or increase of economically active people to Skye, because we all know that's the way to keep a sustainable population.
So thank you for that. I think, and it's not something I'm directly involved with, but others will be familiar with it, but the Convention of the Highlands and Islands, I believe, has a big focus on depopulation. I don't know how familiar you are with that, but But that is something I believe that is one of their standing items in terms of where they're going to go. So depopulation, certainly they're looking at. We know the Scottish Government are looking at doing something along those lines as well. And again, I mentioned before, depopulation isn't down to one single issue. It's down to, and I no point in me rehearsing it, you'll be more familiar with it than I am, but it's down to a whole range of issues. So I'm hoping that we'll get something concrete by the end of the year in relation to what they're going to say, because I think hopefully COHI and the Scottish Government will dovetail in relation to what we're going to do with this action plan.
Okay, Councillor Monroe and then Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Angus. Thank you very much for the report. It's a really comprehensive overview of quite a diverse range of funds and initiatives, I think, and it's good to have it pulled together in one place. I think it's been a challenge just to grasp the landscape. So you've done that really well, and I think it's good just to have you here, talking to it. And now we know, and I think as Councillor Finlayson said, that link we've made with yourself, I think we can build on that. You mentioned the Convention of Highlands and Islands, Angus, and that was my question. In terms of Highland Council, is that political or officer engagement with COHI, and how frequently does that happen? Is it a biannual or annual convention, Angus?
So it happens, I understand it happens twice a year. It will happen, they alternate between an island venue and a mainland venue. The chief executive again and the leaders again go to this. I'll tell you who it was chaired by before. It was chaired by John Swinney, and it was actually John Swinney's last day was the last COHI. I don't know who's taken over, but John Swinney certainly had a real passion for that, and it was very much his baby. So whatever role that he was in, John Swinney in the Scottish Government, he always maintained the COHI brief. Now, I say I don't know who's taking over that. I don't know, but yeah, and the senior officer group in relation to that, that's not me. I believe that's probably the ECOs like Malcolm, etc. will be involved in that. It's quite a very high level.
Okay. Just a pity we hadn't got John Swinney to Skye on his last day, because he went to the Western Isles and was very generous to them, if I remember correctly. So we'll need to make sure we get whoever his replacement is, maybe Shona Robinson, to Skye. Drew?
Yeah, before her last day. That might be useful. No, thanks, Angus. Nice to put a face to the email, the weekly email. And I have clicked on one or two of the links. In fact, your last one last week, I found one quite interesting. But so it's nice to put a face to that. And it would be nice to see you perhaps more often at our World Business meeting, or rather, just to keep us in the loop of, and we could maybe give you our thoughts as well on the various funds. But yeah, an interesting report. By the way, we didn't give Fiona a hard time today. That was us being nice. That was us being nice today. So just be warned. No, I think that we appreciate the work that the officers are doing, and Fiona in particular. And as I say, I think that as we mentioned earlier, I think we have to look at the things we were unsuccessful with, and just make sure that we add a wee bit more value for money to them, so to speak, and reposition ourselves for the future. But I would certainly welcome maybe a discussion on one or two things at a World Business level, so that we can have a chat about through one or two maybe things coming down the tracks, and see if what we can do. But the carbon neutral thing, we've had a meeting with the people, the two officers based in Raasay. They've just last week, which I found quite interesting, because I hadn't realised just what was going on as much over there. So, but as I say, it would be good just to maybe have you on a more regular basis, have a chance to talk to you and listen to what you have to say to us. So, but thank you for this report. It's excellent.
Okay, thanks, Angus. So you're hearing the message from Skye and Raasay. So remember, we've got two islands in our ward, not just the second biggest island in Scotland, but we've also got another island. So we must be your priority going forward, Angus. So we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very familiar with it, but thank you anyway. Cheers.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
you.
members, we are asked to update and acknowledge the work that's taken place, and I think we've done that. Okay, we're moving on. We're nearly there. Item 10, Willie, it's to do with a street naming request for the Isle of Raasay. Do you want to just give us a very brief summary of where we are with that? I think we're homologating what was decided. Is that right?
That's correct, Chair. Thank you. Good afternoon, members. Yes, a street name request with the contractor's proposed name was issued to the Raasay Community Council for their consideration. However, they were unable to confirm agreement on the name or provide an alternative. As the property required an address to allow the installing of services, the naming request was considered as a matter of urgency at your area business meeting in April, where you indicated your support for the name Deer Park. Members have now been asked to homologate the new street name. That's it, really.
Okay, members, are we happy to do that? Oh, Councillor Stewart isn't happy. Okay, Councillor Stewart?
No, I was just going to say I'm very happy to move the recommendation and agree this naming request.
Okay, yeah, we've agreed that. Okay, and finally, our last item is the ward discretionary budget, and it's really just a summary of all the groups that we've supported during 22-23 with our ward discretionary budget, which unfortunately is rather small, but we were still able to support a high number of groups right across the island and different kind of groups. So that's just for noting. Okay, members, that brings us to the end of our area committee. Can I thank you all for your input? Can I also thank officers for their input? And we'll catch you later on this afternoon. We've got another meeting. Thank you.